Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Today is a Popcast 37, and it's called More on Rediscovery of Awe by Kirk Schneider. We're going to continue with the conversation we were having yesterday about this wonderful book, Rediscovery of Awe. His principal idea is that there should be a whole new psychology that's built starting from awe. Um, that that's the primary experience we all have to deal with, and it is where we find the resources we need to face the fact that we become aware that we will die and that all those around us will die, and that we have to provide for ourselves and our loved ones in order to sustain life, and that there's hate in the world and sometimes hate in us as well. Um, so I really like his starting point of view quite a bit, and his appreciation of awe. Um, and I must say, I think his attempt to build a whole psychology from awe is really powerful, well worth your time reading this book. I have wanted to quote a couple of things. Um, and I used to put my notes up on the screen and split the screen, but so I could read the notes discreetly without appearing to be turning away from you to read something. But I discovered that when I do that, my eyes tend to be looking away from you. And I didn't really like that. I like looking directly towards. So I have to just talk extemporaneously. I write notes. I take some time to think about them. I look them over. And then I just say what's on my mind. But in this case, I'm going to read a couple of quotes from his book. Um, he's taken his basic idea, which we discussed in some detail yesterday, um, and he wants to apply it in all realms of life, in social and business, at home and at school. Um, and his primary concern is developmental, that the way we guide children's development needs to be changed. At the moment, our emphasis is on teaching children how to get along and how to develop competencies. And he says too often that can lead to a relatively dull, boring life where you don't really have any interest in your job, and you get up and go to work someplace nearby, and you're not really doing anything that enlivens or invigorates your life for all those hours of your life. And you come home and your senses have been dulled, and you may not be the person you could be at home, where your work life more invigorating. And I must say, in my own case, I tried to come home invigorated, but I also had work that meant a lot to me. I was a lawyer in a small town, and being able to be a helpful counselor to small businesses and um, people in my own community for various matters, it seemed worthwhile to me, and I kind of enjoyed it. I did it for about 20 years, and so maybe that's why when I came home, I was pretty excited to be home and spend time with family. And usually, a friend of mine pointed out that she was often at the house sitting with Gail, my wife, and she said, when I came in the door, I always sing out, "I'm home," in a way that kind of turned up the whole level of excitement in the house. So I would kind of wish that for everybody. And Schneider's point is um, a dull, boring job life makes that harder. And I really think he's got a good point. So he's saying you have to teach children to encounter awe, not shield them from it or teach them how to hide from it. Because he says that, let me see how I phrase this. Um, Give me just a moment. Yes, he says this. It is precisely through awe that we come to know how daunting life is and how readily our presumptions crumble. And yet, conversely, it is precisely through awe that we are awakened to life's majesty and how dramatically our despair is misplaced. Somewhere in that dynamism is vivacity, the heart, soul, and core of which is both fluid and central. Remember, his whole developmental theory is that what you want to develop in a child is a fluid central. And by central, he means that the child is grounded in practical realities, but also that the child has a part of him that sings. Um, used to have a wonderful little plaque hanging from the kitchen cabinet, uh, and it said, "Parents give their children two great things. One is roots and one is wings." And there was a picture of a tree with the roots illustrated, and on the tree there were birds. And my son Riley kept that for himself as an adult for many, many years. And I always thought it was pretty wise on Gail's part to have found that and displayed it. And that's the best quote I wanted to read. Um, so in business, he then proposes. Okay, so first he talked about developmental issues. Um, as we talked about some yesterday, and he uses the story of this hypothetical case of Toby to illustrate why and how, in some detail, it goes on for quite a large part of the book, why and how Toby's developmental issues can be um, made more useful to him in life to bring his vitality, to open him more to awe and wonder and to etc. And so then he's in another large part of the book. He then talks about practical applications of this psychology of that starts with awe, and he talks about it in business, in home and school, and in society at large. And in business, he says we should move away from production for maximum profit towards participation of the employee in the work and of service, a social, spiritual service attitude, so that work involves real participation in meaningful work. Um, and as he describes it, the drive and self initiative are the engines, the primeval engines of capitalism, and those can be brought into balance um, by appropriate changes. And then, in that capacity, they can serve life, and business can be made to serve life rather than, you know, the experience that it is today, where so often it's pure money grubbing and profit maximization at the expense of an awful lot of important social values involving the employees and the community. Um, His idea is that if we reduce inequalities um, by a variety of programs, including um, taxation, but also other emphasis and rewards, if we reduce inequalities, then family life can prosper because people would have a living wage out of a reasonable amount of time spent at work, but have more time to enjoy and participate in family life after a meaningful day spent at work and a paycheck that allows for needs to be met. And he says the challenge that's posed is whether conventional notions of success can be converted into visionary conceptions, whether, for example, wealth can be redefined to mean a capacity for humility, reverence, and wonder, for awe, um, instead of the amount of money that one acquires by running your business for profit only. Um, and he talks about the primal uh, in education. He wants the education to be reformed so that children are included in his developmental scheme. They're brought to relation, a happy relation with awe, with the fact of our death, with being, with our existence, um, and as he said, it's both fraught with fear and wonder, this experience of awe. But he talks about the primal, and he describes them as wind, stars, rain, death, loss, anxiety, desire, guilt, suffering. And he says, if children are assisted to acknowledge these things, there will be less need for them to control them or to indulge in them or to appropriate them in later life. The recognition of the significance of time has a great deal to do with this enlarged consciousness. And to facilitate this, he said parents should be encouraged to incorporate pauses, curiosities, and adventure into family life that children would benefit immensely. So I want to put for today two things. He has another whole section of the book at the end um, about an enchanted ethics, an enchanted view of the world um, that makes room for both those people who believe that the source of this enchantment is God, and those people who just see it as a creative goodness that they truly can't understand. Um, and all of those people would recognize that psychologically awe is at the center of our being and calls to us, and that would be the basis for um, a global ethics that people of all faiths and agnostics and atheists could join in. And um, so we'll talk about that in a couple of days. But tomorrow, he puts a quote in that's just fabulous, and I think very much on point for us for these days. His point is the problem of extremism is attachment. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Remember, he's talking about the center of your personality being both fluid and centered. And by fluid, he means that we recognize and acknowledge that change and inconstancy and the vicissitudes of life are also part of us, and we accept them. Our attachment is refusing to accept them. And he says that leads to extremism. So we're going to develop that tomorrow. So for today, enough. Take care. See you tomorrow.